Alrighty, so we're going to go ahead and begin. I'm Pam Lofton Wells, agency owner of Lofton Wells Insurance, and welcome to our first webinar on cybersecurity. With everyone working from home, due to COVID, it has really put our businesses at risk, and that's one reason why I've asked Drayton Mears, president of Memphis, Memphis location of TeamLogic. I do apologize. Drayton. He is the president of TeamLogic IT in Memphis, and also Brian Thornton. He's the president of ProWriters Cybersecurity Insurance brokerage. They are going to be talking about their concerns about cybersecurity and why insurance is important to have in our businesses today. There will be a Q&A afterwards. And please, if you have any questions, please enter them into the chat, and I will be getting those and I will send them over to our speakers today. I would like to go ahead and turn this over to Drayton, and I'm going to unmute you, Drayton, and pull up your presentation. Okay, Drayton, are you there?
Hi, greetings, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much for inviting me, Pam. It's one of my favorite topics. I'm passionate about cybersecurity. I have been since I started my business in 2011. I had absolutely no idea that cybersecurity would become front page news, and even then, I had a commitment to making sure that we had the right skills and competencies and certifications in order to be thoughtful about cybersecurity. My company is a managed service provider. Businesses outsource their technology stack to my team of engineers, and I've got a team of level 2 and level 3 engineers that are all very experienced and certified in a variety of different technologies and security systems. The company itself is one of only 25 companies in the United States that have been certified by the technology industry organization CompTIA. I also have personally, I have my own certifications with the American Institute of CPAs for cybersecurity advisory. It's a dangerous world out there, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to protect yourself and how to fight back against this guy. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen. This is one of the most evil cyber criminals known by the FBI. His name is Yevgeny. He is from the Soviet Union, and he is a crime lord. It's a big business by any measure. It's either the 6th or the 13th largest economy in the entire world. It's just remarkable. It is organized, but it is decentralized. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of independent crime families. Think mafia, if you will, or as I like to call them, evilpreneurs. There's also state actors like North Korea or Russia or China. What's important to understand in this day and age is that the pandemic has opened up the door for an absolute tsunami of scams that are trying to steal your business's financial resources, or your intellectual property, or your client list, or other things that they find of value, but really they're looking for money. How do they do that? The number one way is through phishing attacks, through emails. And ladies and gentlemen, it has spiked. It is a radical spike, 600% increase since February. 54% were classified as scams. 34% were impersonating important organizations like the SBA or the IRS or brands like Microsoft and PayPal. My own company, TeamLogic IT Memphis, we've processed 5 million emails since the beginning of the year. 36% of that was spam, and an outstanding or 4% or 8 times 2019. It's just remarkable the volume growth. We ran 78,000 antivirus and anti-malware scams. 5% contained viruses like ransomware. This is a 25-time increase. Look, nobody, don't believe anybody that says that they have the ability to immunize you against a cyber threat. It's absolutely impossible. All you can do is your best in order to protect yourself. How do you do that? Is with a layered defense. That includes technology, software, talent, and process and controls. I follow the National Institute of Standards Cybersecurity Policies and Procedures. It's designed to help you identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. These are the key components of a solid cybersecurity plan, and I use this myself in order to protect my own company and ultimately my customers. There are 15 components to a well-structured and well-built security plan. 6 absolutely critical must-haves is a firewall, antivirus that's kept up to date, anti-spam that's kept up to date, security patches delivered by Microsoft, kept up to date, and 2 of the most important of all 15, certainly of the 6, is employee training and backup and disaster recovery. And I'd like to spend a few moments on those 2 right now. Look, I can tell you from years of experience being on the other side of the table from the tears by business owners like yourself that have experienced ransomware and have been devastated. They've lost critical data that they've spent years, if not generations, in developing. Intellectual property, financial resources, the downtime absolutely kills them. And I can tell you that while all backups are good, file backups just aren't good enough. And there is nothing better than an image backup, which allows you to back up both your software as well as your files. Your best defense is a wonderful offense. And I think that your employees are part of your army, an army that can help protect yourself by being aware. And I encourage you to train them to spot some of the following phishing scams. For example, here's one that's from PayPal. Look at the address. It's from PayPalAustralia.com. AU is the country code for Australia. Look, I live in Memphis, Tennessee. If I get that and I see that, as I roll my cursor over that, I'm going to know that that's a telltale sign of a phishing email. But what about the subject line that contains, kind of spurious information about what they believe is a problem with my account? What about the bad grammar? Or what about hovering over the URL that doesn't even equate to PayPal? These are prime examples of phishing emails. Big topic right now is for CEOs to be what we call whale fished, and this is where somebody comes in and they take over the compromised email account, and then they send this email to their CFO, their controller, the person that has the authority to make a wire transfer on their behalf. Look, I think that this is an amazing opportunity for you to generate perhaps new revenue for your company by showing your customers or prospective customers that you are 100% committed to cybersecurity and that you've put in the controls in place, that you're using the right technology, that you're using the other right talent in order to make sure that that they are protected. And I think that that has the ability to distinguish you in the marketplace. And Pam, I promise to send to each of your attendees today what we believe to be are the 15 most important building blocks to develop a really a robust cybersecurity plan that you have the ability to discuss with your customers and your prospective customers. Thanks a lot, Pam. I appreciate you allowing me to be with you and your guest today, and I look forward to hearing Brian. And I know that that Brian really knows his stuff, folks. And this cybersecurity ideas and what Brian's going to share with you now is critical to a robust risk management plan.
Well, thanks, Drayton, and thanks, Pam, for putting this together. So, what I want to talk about here a little bit is just give you some information on cyber insurance, what it is, what the exposures are, what's covered by the policies, what's not covered by the policies, and kind of what's the latest that's going on in that space kind of holistically, which I think will give you a better picture of what we're talking about from that perspective. So the first thing we typically talk about for businesses are, what are the exposures, just getting up to speed on understanding what exposures your business faces from a cyber perspective. So we've got a few things, and we've got some of them listed here. So traditionally, when the product started, it was really built around data breaches. So as countries, states started passing laws about data breach and your obligation to notify consumers. We've all received those letters from businesses, whether it's been Experian or somebody else that's lost our data, that's offered us a year of credit monitoring, things like that. So the policies were often built to cover liability if you were sued related to privacy breach or data breach. And then they started evolving to cover that notification. So what happened was businesses that thought about purchasing this were businesses that had a lot of data, a lot of credit card data, people that touched healthcare data that were subject to HIPAA, businesses that had credit cards, and usually less small businesses, but larger businesses that had a large aggregation of credit card information. And what the data breach coverage component of the policy was covering your notification to all those businesses, the forensics related to it, down the line, offering the credit monitoring. So data breach is a big component of where the coverage started, and one of the big components of what it offers you as a business. Today, what we've seen over the last 5 years is ransomware has grown prevalently. A lot of what Drayton was talking about as far as business email compromise and that security around emails is how often ransomware gets in. But so ransomware is a huge component of the coverage that you get with these policies. And so it's critical to have that coverage as a business. It's now expanded this policy to be covering any business that's using any kind of technology. So it's not just businesses with a lot of data, but people want to get in and they want to extort you for a payment. So if you're a medium-sized business and you're in the construction or manufacturing space and you didn't necessarily have a lot of consumer information or a lot of healthcare information, the policy now covers you in that ransomware event from start to finish. And we'll touch a little bit on what some of those coverages entail, but ransomware is a critical component of having a robust policy from a carrier that really knows what they're doing, as opposed to potentially just a small add-on to another policy that might not be as robust in that space. Another section we talk about is digital asset damage or network asset damage. What that means is really the policy would cover your cost to get your company whole. So whether that's restoring from backups and the cost to hire firms to do that, the extra cost for your IT company that they'll bill you through to build you back up to where you were. But what that's meant to do is any kind of electronic data that you hold is to bring it back to where you were prior to the incident. So sometimes that data is not easily recoverable, and often you have to potentially rebuild, so that could get expensive. The next component that's a critical kind of exposure that you face is that business interruption. Typically when we see businesses have an event, when they start calling either their broker or their carrier or the vendors that are involved with getting them back up and running, their number one priority is often to get back up and running. I need to get back up and running. I need to continue to process our business. We're going to be losing money while we're down. And so we need to fix whatever the problem is first and then start dealing with the kind of aftermath. And so having the policy cover business interruption, and there's different types of business interruption that we'll talk about as far as the coverage, but that's a critical component to the policies and the exposures that businesses face. Other exposures are things like lost business, lost customers. If you don't manage the process well, or the claim and the messaging when you have an incident to your customers, they may opt to go to one of your competitors in the future. And so we've seen companies that have managed the process well and built up customer loyalty, that they feel like it was dealt properly, the messaging was appropriate, that they were there to support them if they had questions or needs. And we've seen other businesses that don't notify on a timely basis, that have mixed messages, that aren't ready to support the customers when they come and call and have questions about the breach or how they're affected. Those are the ones where we see a huge damage to their brand and their business of future customers leaving. So that's kind of in part reputational harm. So the policies are really designed, and that's an exposure to cover, would be your reputation. And then one of the other exposures, and this is a huge coverage that's growing and an exposure that's growing, is crime coverage. And so what we mean by that from a cybercrime perspective is some sort of theft of funds, whether that's someone getting into your business, finding your password and telling the bank, logging in as you and telling the bank to send money somewhere, and you lose the money that way. And then we have social engineering, which is where the bad guys get you to accidentally send the funds out. So they trick you into thinking that you're sending them to your normal vendor. They've hacked into your system. They've edited some emails. Some of the things Drayton talked about are some of the things you'd look for when you're looking at those emails, specifically if it's related to an invoice or a wire that you need to make. And so we've got some things we'll talk about there. But having those coverages are important, because those are the big exposures that businesses are facing, and specifically ransomware and the crime component are exposures that are growing. And small businesses are disproportionately affected in this exposure because they are the low-hanging fruit that often have less resources and less controls in place than the big guys. And often the way that people get in is often through email. And so, there's a kind of less targeted approach that the criminals, blanket the market with these types of issues to get into your system. And once they're in, then they're kind of focus on you. So when we talk about what's covered under a cyber policy, when we think about the exposures, okay, what's covered? There's really a couple different components. First party would be your costs. Third party would be if someone sued you or brought a claim against you for liability, that you cost them money or caused them a damage that you are now being held responsible for. So when we think about first party, that's often what triggers first. You have an event, you realize something's happened, whether it's ransom or a breach or an outage. And so what the policies cover, and it's important to kind of think about these things, are the first thing you often have to do, and we remind people, you should be reaching out to the appropriate person. So if you have a policy, we advise you to go to the law firm that comes with the policy so that you can invoke attorney-client privilege around the conversations, and they can kind of quarterback you through this as far as reaching out to the forensics firm and the carrier and the notification centers, and making sure that all that correspondence is attorney-client privilege, so that if you do get sued in the event of a breach, that all that conversation is protected. We want to make sure that in the event that you do have that claim, you're actually notifying the carrier promptly so that you can get them involved. And really what then happens is the policy picks up the bill to cover the forensics, so to hire a firm to come in and figure out what happened. Did they get in? Is it a ransomware event? If it's not a ransomware event, it's a breach, what information did they access? How did they get in? We need to plug the hole of wherever they got in. We need to fix that issue so they can't get back in. And then we need to figure out what they've potentially accessed. So forensics is a big part of it. It gets very technical. It's really important, but having the right vendor there that has that experience is critical. Then often it's notification expense. So your cost to notify those customers, whether that's drafting the text of a notice to them, whether that's bringing in a firm, whether that's your law firm or a PR firm to look at these things and figure out the right message, having a call center available that you would put into that correspondence that they can call this number, because if often beyond a small breach or a very small breach, you do need a third party to be able to answer those phones and kind of direct people appropriately for you so that you can then focus on getting your business back up and running. Credit monitoring is often something that you need to offer within those notifications. And that's, again, another coverage under the policy that's critical to have. Ransomware is covered. So, often what we see is, ultimately if the insured figures out what's happened, they've got the forensics reports and they're figuring out, okay, what do we do to be made whole? There's a small percentage of these where they do decide that they need to pay the ransom. Either the backups are compromised or they didn't have them in an appropriate manner, or they think that's the best course of process to get back up and running as fast as they can. It's not as frequent as people think, but the policies do cover that ransom payment, and it's ultimately up to the insured if they need to make that payment. But the ransom would be covered. Business interruption is a critical component to covering you for your lost profits during that downtime. It's a really important coverage to have in these policies, and a good policy would have that. And there's different types of coverage from a business interruption perspective, but the coverages now include things like dependent third-party business interruption. So if you rely on a third-party outsourced firm, whether that's a cloud provider or any sort of hosting company, and they are down, and that causes you a cyber business interruption, a network interruption that causes you lost profits, that would be covered. And then you have things like system failure, which are less of about a breach and potentially could just be a outage, whether that's the cable company was out front of your office building and dug up the network lines, and all of a sudden your business is down, to employee error. So there are instances where the policies would cover those types of things as well from a business interruption perspective. And then we talked about network asset damage. That cost to rebuild all of your electronic data is critical to really getting you whole and back up and running to where you were. And then the last kind of key first party coverages are crime and social engineering, which we talked about, but that's really important to kind of have that in place. And, a good broker such as Pam would be able to kind of advise you, because there are crime policies, then there's cyber policies that have this extension of crime coverage and the differences and gaps and overlaps there. But most of these cyber policies, those crime events and social engineering events are often tied to a ransomware event or an intrusion into your network. And so that's why this kind of evolved into a portion of the cyber policy, because often this is tied to an event that triggers multiple coverages under the policy, not just one specific coverage. And then not to be overlooked is the third-party coverage. So you've got, indemnity. If a customer were to make a claim against you that you caused them some sort of damage, it covers your legal bills to defend yourself, to do those investigations, to respond if there's an actual complaint filed against you. It covers those liabilities, so it covers the defense, but potential indemnity if you do end up having to settle those things. And then similarly, when you have these breaches, you have obligations under every single state to provide notification, usually to the state attorney general. There's usually a time frame. It's often 72 hours in most places, where you have to provide them a report in a specific format that answers very specific questions. And the lawyer that comes with the policy will be able to advise you and make sure that you're on target for giving them what they need in the time frame that they need. And that will keep them off your back. But the policy does cover all those costs to respond to regulators in an appropriate manner. And if they were to fine you, if they found that you did something negligent, it would cover those costs as well. And then we talk about PCI. That's another critical coverage. So any business that takes credit cards is exposed from the perspective of the payment card industry, has some specific vehicles to make consumers or other businesses whole when there's a credit card breach. So you need to be PCI compliant to take credit cards, and whether that's you being compliant or you're using a third-party outsourced provider that does that credit card processing for you, they have to be compliant to be able to take credit cards, and there's an annual certification process. We won't dive into the details because that could be an entire call within and of itself, but the policies any good policy would cover you fully for PCI fines, penalties, as well as assessments. And the difference there is the fines are kind of set that if you have a breach and you're this size, the first breach cost X, 50,000, and then $100,000 or $150,000 fine, and the policy would cover that. But the assessments are really where costs can build up if you had a breach that caused consumer fraud. So we've all seen something on our credit card statement that says someone bought a big screen TV at Best Buy and that wasn't me. So you fill out the form and the credit card company gives you that charge back and makes you whole. Ultimately, that gets bundled back when they figure out where the breach was and where that came from, and they send it back to the business that had the breach that caused that damage. So having those assessments coverage would be critical, because as you bundle that, the bigger and bigger the breach is, the more of those fraud charges that get bundled, as well as the credit card reissuance cost. All the banks that have to reissue cards when there is a breach, those get expensive when you add those up. So all that gets bundled back to a charge back to the business, regardless of whether you've outsourced to a third-party provider to process. You can outsource the service, but the liability doesn't go. And so having that coverage is critical, because a lot of people, I think, believe that because they've outsourced the service, they don't have the liability, that they're using a compliant vendor. And if there's a problem, it's their problem, but it's not. It's the business's problem. And so that's a critical point just to to focus on for any business that has credit cards that takes them. That's something they need. From a third-party perspective, you also have media liability coverage. So any sort of content, and this kind of is a relic of when the policy started, it evolved out of E&O and media policies, but would cover your online content from your website for any traditional media claim for content that's on there. If people were to think that you libeled or slandered them, or there's a copyright infringement related claim to the content on your website. So those are the third-party coverages. And then the last piece of this is the vendor panel. What you're really paying for when you buy these policies is the claims experience and the panel of vendors that are expert vendors that do nothing but handle these types of breaches every single day. So that's invaluable when you have a breach, because even with a policy and having access to all these things, it is still incredibly disruptive to your business and it's incredibly chaotic. So working with the top vendors that do this every single day, that know exactly what they're doing, and are going to protect your best interest and get you back up and running and make sure that you respond to claims and lawyers and regulators is really important. So that panel comes with every carrier policy, and they're pre-negotiated rates, so you're paying a lower rate. You're working with a firm that's an expert, and so that's really going to pay dividends on the back end. And so when we think about the coverage, we also want to kind of highlight things that aren't covered or can't necessarily be covered by insurance. So the kind of potential, if you really damage your reputation and don't manage a breach properly, and the messaging to your customers, and those customers leave in the long run, there's a period of business interruption if there's an outage that a policy can cover. But that damage to your reputation and the lost future profits of consumers or businesses that won't do business with you because they feel that they're not going to be comfortable with the security that you've got around your business or the way that you responded and protected your partners is something that's beyond what insurance can cover. So that's critical to think about. And what we've seen are businesses that have a policy that get access to all those vendors and jump on a claim and manage an incident properly don't have that issue. So it's another kind of reason to say to get a policy is really important. And so that kind of, we've talked about that reputational harm, and the business interruption coverage only goes for so long. And so usually it's, maybe a period of 90 days, and usually we've never really seen outages that go beyond that, but it's a point to make. If you lose critical intellectual property, if you're a type of business that has that, whether you're a law firm or a specific business that has that kind of information electronically, there's only so much that a policy can do that could cover you for claims related to that. But if you lose something that's invaluable, a critical piece of intellectual property, there's not as much that a policy could do for you in the long run for that. Some policies will cover some related bodily injury, property damage, pollution arising out of a breach, but there's other policies that might be more appropriate to cover your business for those types of claims. And then client funds was the last piece in here. The policy does cover, the crime component will cover your operational funds if they get taken by a hacker or you get tricked into sending those funds out and then realize after the fact that you were tricked. But only some of the policies apply to client funds. So if you are a custodian of client funds or goods, so a lawyer that might have your funds in escrow, an escrow agent, those types of businesses, a bookkeeping firm, those are firms that also need some specialty coverage there so that the crime component covers client funds that they have in their care, custody, and control. So that's another component that some policies cover and don't. And then trends, and I'll try to stay on track on time, but there's a lot that's going on in the space. The coverage is different than traditional insurance coverages in that it's evolving constantly. Carriers are constantly updating the wording. It's a really specialty product, so all the carriers have their own unique wordings as opposed to standardized wordings. There's new markets that are getting into the space. There's new kind of what they call insurtechs that are highly tech-enabled markets that are getting into the space as well. And so there's a lot to kind of manage there to make sure that when you're talking to a business that you've got the best kind of product for them based on their needs. And that's where, working with a good local independent agent like Pam they're going to be able to have access to all these products and be able to look at them and explain the differences. So, there are a lot of new markets. There's a lot of new coverages. There's not a lot of new services that come with these policies. So it's critical to stay on top of those. And so that's something we would highlight as far as a trend, unlike maybe other products. From a distribution perspective, there's a lot of options for businesses where they can, maybe go to a portal that says, hey, we'll quote your cyber for you right here. And that's fine and well if it's coming from your local broker, but often if it's from the carrier directly to that consumer, what you're getting on the back end is you're getting a boxed product with a licensed agent that doesn't necessarily have the specialty knowledge. And they often just have that one individual product, and that might not be the right one for you. So we just warn people of those direct to market products that they might not be getting the best advice for them in their business in those areas. As far as services, this is something important to highlight. A lot of the policies come with a whole suite of services that can be really important to a small business. So there's risk management services, there's software potential services, there's consulting services. So the carriers are expanding beyond just the policy itself to provide additional things to help businesses either prevent risks or deal with them on the back end. So helping you put in plans in place, like a breach response plan, so that if you did have a claim, you've already kind of walked through the process of what you would do and who you would call and the process so that you're prepared when you have one. There's informational portals. There's a firm called Net Diligence a lot of the carriers use, and they run something called an e-risk hub, so that when you buy your policy, you get access to this portal, and it's a place for all really good resources on different regulatory issues, different updates on claims that are out there in the industry that are affecting companies similar to yours, that you can easily search and pull that information and kind of understand what your peers are dealing with. So all these things are really good, and some of the policies are now going beyond that to provide cyber risk assessment at the time of quoting the policy, which is really helpful information for you to discuss with your IT provider, so that if you were using someone like Drayton, you could call and say, hey, I just got this scan and I want to understand some of these things. It's pointed out a couple of things, and what does this mean? Or it's recommending I do certain things, and you know, how do we go about this, or is this important? So it really helps the insurance buyer really talk to the IT folks. And there's carriers that are now providing kind of management throughout the policy period, that they will, when there's a known vulnerability, they'll go scan all of their insureds, and if anyone doesn't have that patch in place, like Drayton talked about patching being very important, they'll proactively reach out and say, hey, this new vulnerability came out. It's going after this exploit, and you have not patched this. You need to go do this. And if you need help, pick up the phone and call us, and we'll explain what you need to go do. And so that's, you know, way beyond where the market was a couple of years ago. So these are all great things that small businesses can take advantage of with policy. And then from a claims perspective, we talked a little bit about this. You know, we are seeing a large increase in ransomware claims. We're seeing, you know, from a frequency perspective, but more so from a severity perspective. A lot of times when you saw these ransoms 5 years ago, they were $5,000. You know, then they became $50,000, and now we're seeing 100, 200,000. You know, it's not unusual for a small to middle market business to see, you know, $700 million ransomware demand. And so you're seeing bigger and bigger demands, and often they've been in your system and they kind of know what you can afford. They know what your bank account looks like. And so they've gotten much more sophisticated, and so that's a big exposure. And they've also, one of the updates in ransomware that we've seen lately is not only do they ransom you, but they get into your system and exfiltrate all your information before they lock you down and ask for the payment. So that if you can recover from your backups and you can get back up and running, they can still then leak that information publicly, and then you're dealing with a breach. So they've gotten smart to the people that have been able to recover from their backups, and now have said, we're going to go leak this information if you still don't make the payment, even if you were able to get back up and running. So that's a new bend on ransomware. Social engineering, again, we talked about this, but we're seeing more and more frequency here, especially for small businesses. And they're, again, disproportionately affected by these claims because, you know, for a big business that's got 500 million in revenues to get hit with, you know, $150,000 ransom social engineering event, it's painful and you learn from it, but it's not going to put them out of business. Where we're seeing small businesses get hit with $50,000, $100,000 social engineering events, and they might only have $1 million in revenue. So that can be really damaging. So it's important to have the policy in place to cover you for that, but then also what will come with this is some of the best practices to prevent that from happening, so that you don't have to go through that process. And then lastly, we've seen, you know, studies on kind of these losses that we just talked about, which has led to price increases for larger businesses, but by and large, not so much in the small business space. And so there's still a lot of carriers that are competing for that business, that want to be able to automate and make this really easy for businesses to get the policies and get the services, and they feel like they can do this at an appropriate rate. So, you know, in today's day and age, you can often get a very broad standalone policy that is not expensive at all. And to me, you know, as a small business owner and manager, it's as critical as GL coverage or any of the other coverages that you need to operate your business. I would not be surprised if at some point in the future it becomes a mandatory coverage for businesses.
Thank you, Brian. But both of y'all have really provided some informational informative information. I do have a couple of questions for you. Let's see. Drayton, what did you mean by layered security strategy?
That's a good question. The way I look at it is outside of the firewall, all the way down to the users. And what happens is that there's a two-way transportation system of data coming into the company, going out to the outside of the other company to clients, for example. And so for us, a layered security strategy starts outside of the firewall, so-called DNS, that allows us to manage the good and bad traffic coming in and out of the network. And yes, sometimes there is bad information that leaves the network, especially if you've been breached and compromised. Then, of course, you have a firewall. What we're finding today is that a lot of companies have firewalls, but they're old, and they don't have the latest technology, including something called intrusion protection. So it's a critical element of the strategy. Then you come below the firewall, and you have something that is called the network, and that has network traffic. Think of it that's the data traveling around the office space, like your office, Pam. All of your employees, they're communicating with one another. They're sharing files and things like that. Security at that layer. Then, of course, you've got the security at the workstation, laptop, mobile devices, typically protected by antivirus and malware. And then, of course, if you have a server or if you have cloud servers, it would be the protection of those servers and also the cloud servers. So to have a layered defense is to look at what's happening outside the firewall, at the network level, at the user level, and then of course the other servers either on premise or in the cloud. Critical to this is anti-spam. Because we know that 90% of the ransomware, or these dangerous pay packets, are being delivered by compromised emails that your employees are receiving, that in their documents, in the PDFs, and the XLS files that are coming in from seemingly safe senders. So having that layered security strategy is part of those 15 building blocks that we think are best practices for companies to use to protect themselves.
Well, there's so much involved in security. I know I consider myself very technically savvy, but it changes so quickly. It's amazing in regards to how you have to stay up on all of it. And, that's where I kind of go, okay, I'll sell the insurance, you handle the IT. I used to try to do it myself, and you just can't do that. I know what I know, and you know what you knew, and we have to go with that.
Yeah.
And I know having that peace of mind, having that, the cyber policy, that definitely gives me a peace of mind, because I really didn't understand cyber, way back when it first started. It was a concern. And now I'm like, I don't have to lay awake at night and go, oh, did I get, attacked? And I have Drayton, and I have my policy with one of the carriers, with ProWriters. And I have that peace of mind because I can just go in and say, you know what, you guys are going to take care of me, and I know all's going to be good. And hopefully I can continue business as I should. Now with the COVID going on,
I think that's one of the great things about cyber insurance. Having the 15 building blocks in place, that gives you the business owner the opportunity to focus on, making sure that somebody like me, as one of your clients, has the right insurance coverage for me personally, or for my business. I'd rather have you spend your time doing that, which is driving your business forward, rather than losing sleep over cybersecurity or risk management. I mean,
Yeah.
my job is to keep our saws shut. I only hire level 2, level 3 engineers. If they don't earn a technical certification at least one a year, then they don't work for me. Because as you say, it moves so fast that we're in training literally constantly. It never ends.
Brian, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, from an underwriting perspective, carriers do value businesses, small businesses that get over that hump and say, I'm going to use a third party that knows a lot more about this, that can do things more appropriately. Because when you get started, you may try to do some things yourself. And once it gets to that point of all right, we're an active business, we're going to move forward. As an underwriter myself over the years, I always valued that company that said, okay, I'm going to start using a third party. I might even start taking advantage of the cloud back in the day when it was newer. I always looked at that and thought, these companies are going to be better at managing this and putting in robust security controls than you trying to do it yourself. And so those were risks that we were always willing to write at a lower rate because of that. Today, many years later, carriers, almost every small business is using some sort of third-party provider or cloud provider for different pieces of their business. So we still view that as value because they're going to be, Amazon's going to be better at managing certain things through AWS than you might be trying to do it yourself. And I think there was also, it's tough because Drayton can do everything right, but it takes one employee to click one bad link or to leave a piece of hardware somewhere that's the remote device that's open to get one person in. So the bad guy only has to be successful once.
Yeah.
And Drayton has to be successful, 1,000 times a day for every single business. So there's a challenge there. And that's where I think the policy comes in to say, hey, you still need to be focused on the risk management side and the tools you can put in place. But the policy is here as a backstop so that if something does happen, you are prepared and you've got that risk transfer.
Yeah, Pam, there's something called the HIPAA Wall of Shame that's put out by the Department of Health and Human Services. It's called the HIPAA Wall of Shame, and the number one breach for medical organizations is lost or stolen laptops. I mean, the entire, I'd say 80% of the reasons why there are breaches because of a lost or stolen laptop. And Brian's absolutely right. I mean, the human that works for each and every one of us is really our greatest risk because that's where the majority of the breaches take place, either clicking on the wrong attachment or lost and stolen laptops when they're in travel. But one of the things that you made a point of, Brian, that I'm really impressed with is the evolution of coverage. And I'd like for you to talk a little bit more about that vendor panel, because I think that's an amazing resource that Pam can deliver, depending upon the choice that the owner makes regarding what carrier to choose. But for Pam to deliver that panel of experts is man, that's worth the price of admission.
Yeah, it's critically valuable. It's for small and large businesses to be working with the right vendors that know exactly what they're doing. And so, the examples that we've seen are a business, even I want to say it was Target when they had their breach. We spent something like $20 million on forensics with a non-approved PFI and forensic investigator that put everything for the PCI Claims Council in the wrong format, and they had to redo it all. So this is a highly sophisticated company with a massive team of internal IT expertise, and they botched it because they didn't consult with their carrier while they were doing some of these things. And so they ended up just re-spending a lot of that money to go redo things. So when you think about small businesses, what you get, and this small we can use loosely, it can still be very large businesses. Being able to call the law firm instantly when you have an incident and you're not even sure what's happening, either you're ransomed or you've had a breach, but you don't even know where to start. Being able to call a law firm that deals with that 24/7, they've got someone on staff 24/7 to deal with that phone call. They've also worked with all the carriers because they're on all these panels. So they then also, the law firm will get started with you instantly. Within a couple of hours, they're on the phone with you with a team of people trying to figure out what you know, what do we need to do, who do we need to contact? Okay, we'll do a lot of this for you. But they'll also call the carrier, and they'll know the claims people, and they'll know their cell phones. They'll be able to get them at home on a Saturday morning and say, hey, we've got a ransomware event and this thing expires on Sunday. And before you ever get back to the office in a pre-COVID world, I need you to either approve a payment or here's what we're dealing with. And so we need to kind of move quickly. And so having those vendors that have had that experience and all work together is hugely valuable to stop from making missteps, especially when there's that time frame component with something like ransomware. We usually have 72 hours potentially to respond. And then when you think about it, we've had risks where brokers have seen us use different forensics providers. Why did you use Crypsis on this one and use Kroll on this one? Well, because the law firm that's managing this has managed 5,000 breaches a year for the past 2 decades. And so, they know that this one is the right one for that firm and this one's the right one for that firm. And the carrier is going to approve these. They're all pre-approved, so they know that they've got the expertise, but they also know which one's the right one, because sometimes there's a suite of services that need to happen on one claim, and one might just need one specific service, and it might be better to go to a different place. Or we've seen when there's major breaches and you get all the right vendors together, there might be, when Experian just had their claim, you might not be able to go to a certain call center because they're handling Experian's claim and they got to notify the entire world that they lost their social security numbers, and a small business might be better going to a different call center or outsourced provider to do some of these services. So there's a lot that comes with that. And the biggest thing is on the legal side. Forensics are critical to get the right provider that have dealt with a lot of this and have the right expertise and know how to deal with the carriers as well. But the law firm is critical to work with those providers. We see people that don't have policies that go to their business law firm and say, hey, help us with this. And that law firm, while they're lawyers and they're good at what they do, if they haven't handled breach response services over and over and over again for many, many years, they're going to be figuring it out on your dime. And they're not going to be experts in that process. And what you want is the policy that after you've paid your deductible, the carrier's covering everything. So you don't have to worry about the expense. You're also getting the pre-negotiated rate, which is going to be much lower because of the volume that these firms are getting from all the carriers. So, but the expertise is by far the critical component. And so that saves you a lot of time and effort and pain of someone that's figuring it out while they go, as opposed to someone that knows exactly what they're doing.
Oh, I think that's fantastic that the carriers offer those vendors. I mean, to try to find someone locally that has that experience, I mean, it's like finding a needle in a haystack. And by the time you call your attorney here locally that's not done with that, and they charge $250 to $500 an hour, you've already paid for your cyber policy, in 3 to 4 hours, and you're like, oh, I'm going to still owe more, but that cyber policy could have just taken care of all that for you. I think that's a major plus. And, sometimes I'll have people say, I really don't think I need a cyber policy. Well, your business, your BOP's only going to cover $500,000, and it's not giving you all these wonderful tools that the carriers are providing. It's something
a false sense
really
of security
consider.
there for people that see that they have cyber embedded in something else, but it's not from a carrier that specializes in it. It might be missing a lot of the coverages that are now standard and standalone. And in the standalone world, as you know, Pam, I mean, for someone who comes to you, you can have quotes from many carriers in minutes to them and be able to show them, here's all the differences in the coverages and what it's going to do. And I think people also think it's going to be really expensive, and they'd be surprised at how inexpensive the policies are.
I thought it's pretty, it is pretty inexpensive. I mean, even just for the peace of mind, I mean, I would literally, I don't know about y'all, but when my computer does not operate, my stress level goes like up here. So if you can imagine, if you had a data breach, I couldn't even.
I think that it gets back to the idea of how do you put your arms around such a big topic as risk management or cybersecurity. And really, it gets back to that old saying, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. A lot of people think that cybersecurity is expensive, and it's really not, especially when you look at the price to value relationship. What's at risk and what are you trying to protect? And it's scalable. We're talking about small businesses as Brian mentioned. It could be plus or minus $1 million. It could be 10, 50, 100, $200 million. It's all scalable. So it's not expensive, especially when you look at it from a price to value relationship. What are you trying to protect? Who are you trying to protect?
Right.
Again, Pam, we've been called in to ransomware attacks, and we've just seen the devastation that takes place, the fear, the uncertainty, the doubt. It's clear. Statistics have shown that a breach, a company will go out of business within 6 months after a breach, if not handled properly. You know, without this, you know, doing it right before you're breached. But even if you are breached, having the right panel of experts to help you sort it out in a timely manner to prevent downtime and to prevent serious reputational harm is
It's hard.
it's small money. It's really pennies on the dollar.
Yeah, and it's tough for businesses that aren't as familiar with all the technology lingo and understanding what all these things are and what they do. And then you get into policies that use a lot of the different language that they're unaccustomed to. You know, I really think about it like fire insurance. You know, businesses understand, all right, if I have a business, whether it's a professional service company or it's a consumer-facing mom and pop shop, you know, you understand the need for fire insurance. If it's not, generally it's going to be required, but outside of that, yes, I understand if everything in the store was lit on fire, I need a policy that would make me whole. And cyber insurance is a very similar structure from that perspective. But if someone gets in, you can be damaged beyond what your balance sheet can afford, and having a policy for a small fee is going to get you right back where you were.
And you know, when you look at your cost of goods for your product and or services, when you actually take a look at the at what cyber insurance would cost, coupled with the right cybersecurity strategy, when you actually look at the impact to your cost of goods for your product or services, it really is it's really pennies on the dollar.
Mm-hmm. Now, Brian, you know, we've talked about the policy and stuff, and you know, the how great it is to have a relationship with another vendor to protect our security. But I know you mentioned you could probably get a discount in, you know, a lower rate when you have a third-party vendor helping us like Drayton. What other ways that we can lower the premium if we wanted to?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one that comes up a lot from brokers and clients. You know, what can we do to get a lower rate on coverage? I think there's some simple things, and a lot of times now in the underwriting process that these carriers have started using scanning as an ability to quickly look at public infrastructure and see what companies have in place. We can see that they can instantly apply credits for certain things, so multi-factor authentication on emails. You know, if they can see that instantly, they can give you either better coverage or a better price. And that's often something that's free or minimal cost to implement. You know, if you need your third-party provider to potentially go around and do that with each person, it might cost a little bit of their time. Generally, that's included with either Office 365 or whatever other service you might be using for your corporate email. But those are things that are inexpensive to implement that really lower your risk, so carriers will then respond. You know, beyond multi-factor authentication, I think there are always other questions, but things you can do. Having a secure email gateway, so that kind of filter beyond just what might come with you log into Outlook and there's a junk folder and you can label something as junk. The secure email gateway, you know, might cost $10 a month per employee, something like that. It could be less depending on what you subscribe to. But from that perspective, it's really scanning everything that's coming in and out, and email is the big entryway for this stuff into your system. And so it's looking at that for bad addresses, known junk. There's all sorts of other filters on this. It's blacklisting a lot of sites to make sure that known bad addresses aren't getting in. So there's a lot that does for a very low cost that carriers value. And you put those two things together, you know, there's other things. I think the most critical one, and this comes with some policies or things that people subscribe to outside of this, are employee training. Because at the end of the day, they're your kind of point of resistance where they can spot something, like some of the things Drayton pointed out in his presentation, some of those slides. Looking at that grammar, looking at some of these things, having that employee training so that they really know what to look for and are comfortable enough, you know, they can prevent that one click that they don't make. Might be the one that saves you a lot of money.
Brian's absolutely right. I mean, every policy that that you're going to offer your clients, they're going to have to complete an application, and they're going to have to take a look at the at those applications, and those questions and the answer to those questions are going to give you a guide as to what gaps you may or may not have. And it's critical that you be honest, and that you recognize your gaps, and you work either with your internal IT team or a company like mine in order to close those gaps. And when you do, an underwriter is going to respect your efforts in order to close the gaps by having that layered strategy and the right policies and procedures in place, and a recovery plan. Again, getting back to those NIST, that you have the ability to kind of hit the marks on all of those areas. And again, it's not set and forget, but once you've done it, you're in a really good position.
You're correct. So I want to, I guess we're getting close on time now, so but I want to thank you both, Drayton and Brian, for joining us today. It was very informative. I pulled up Drayton's information here that you can contact him and talk to him about working with you and your IT needs. And then we would be more than happy to work with you here at Lofton Wells to provide you a quote on some cyber insurance, also along with any other type of insurance needs that you may have. We have a full staff waiting here to assist you in any of your insurance needs. And of course, dealing with our cyber policies, we will be working closely with Brian and his team. But thank you guys so much for joining us today. And thank you, Drayton and Brian, and everyone have a wonderful week. Take care.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot, Pam.
Thanks, Pam.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.